Welcome back to another live stream. So, the first thing to say is you should see that there's some new lighting. Now, the odd thing is that I'm just checking on the stream I've got up on my phone. So, and I do sound a bit robotic as well. I honestly don't know why that's happening. I'm gonna have to look it up at some point. Because the microphone's up to date and everything. Anyway, so the one thing you might notice is that the lighting is slightly different. So I've upgraded my lighting situation. The only thing is that I wasn't going to do a stream today. The main reason I'm doing this stream today is to check how the lighting is and stuff. And I'm not quite in the middle, am I? Yeah, I wanted to check, do a test stream with the lighting, because obviously the conference is coming up this weekend, and I wanted to have better lighting than I do usually for for the conference. And I've just done the new lighting. Now, all the light that's on me is white light, but I'm coming across as yellow on my screen. I can see it looks like there's a yellow sheen on my screen, which is odd. I'm just thinking that it may be because there's so much brown stuff. I don't know if you this is brown, the door is brown, the bookcase is brown. I can only think there's so much brown in the picture that for some reason the curtains are yellow, that for some reason is making the whole thing a bit yellower. But yeah, it's just I don't know. I'll get it sorted out. But anyway, so exactly, it's pale vegan skin. So welcome Brant, who seems to have sent some messages before actually. And then No Injustice Lasts Forever, and does. Welcome to the stream. I see 13 people here, so if anyone else wants to say hello in the stream, in the chat, please do. So for this one, it's basically going to be a bit like the Matt Dillahunty one the other day, whenever we did that. There's this show called Truth Wanted. Now, I'm not going to act like I'm an expert on this show. As far as I can tell, the Atheist Experience, that was that seemed to be the pioneering sort of atheist call-in show. And since then, and since the sort of democratization of things on YouTube, it's easier to have a call-in show. It seems like from that a few more have sprung up, and it seems like Truth, and I'm sure they don't just do atheism, but should we say skeptic call-in shows or whatever. And it seems like, if I'm understanding correctly, Truth Wanted is one of those. And I think Matt Dillahunty does actually sometimes go on the show as a co-host. Welcome Jonah and Massilia as well. Great to have you both. And yeah, anyway, so as far as I can tell, the main host of this show, Truth Wanted, is this guy called Objectively Dan. I'm not sure what his real name is. But it seems like he is at least quite interested in antinatalism, because he keeps on getting calls on it. Okay, let me roll back a bit. So I tried to find all the clips from this show where they've talked about antinatalism, or it's got it in the name, and I found 6 different clips. Now, granted, all of them are from about 3 to 4 years ago, so it seems like they've actually moved off the topic recently, apart from one which was 3 months ago, and I actually already reacted to that one. So actually, if I switch to this screen, so this one actually in one of the sort of anti-natalist reacting streams, I already reacted to this one, so we're not going to do that one today because we've already done it. But in this one, right, it's him. So an anti-natalist calls in, and it's him speaking, and there's a co-host. And this guy, Objectively Dan, actually seems to be somewhat sympathetic with anti-natalism. He understands the validity of the point being made. He doesn't just disregard it, right? He doesn't call it stupid or anything like that. Or that's what I remember. I haven't actually watched that clip again to refresh my mind, but I'm pretty sure I remember him being pretty level-headed on the topic. And to be honest, that doesn't surprise me, given that in all these other clips you can see on screen that we're going to go over today, or get to as many as we can. Like, he's obviously familiar with the topic, so he seems interested in it, which will be cool. But anyway, yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting to go through the catalogue of times when anti-natalists have called into this show, see what they're saying, see how they approach the conversation, see what this guy Dan and any of the co-hosts says, and I'll give my thoughts as well. JE has joined. How you doing, JE? And cool, yeah, if anyone else is in the chat and wants to say hello, then please do. And also, everyone, like, say what country you're in, because it's interesting to see like where people are at around the world. I think that's basically it before we actually start. The only other thing is Henry wants right answers, and Brecken both just entered the chat. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, before we start, the only thing is, just in case anyone has been living under a rock and doesn't know, the Anti-Natalist Advocacy Conference is this weekend. So definitely go, just type in the name Anti-Natalist Advocacy into YouTube, subscribe to that channel. That's where it's going to be. Check out our newsletter and our website as well. I should have the links in the description, at least to the website. Let me check. Yes, in the website link is in the description of this stream, so you can find that there. And also there's if you are watching, make sure to like the stream as well, because it's only been liked 8 times and there are 24 people watching. So that would be very much appreciated. And cool, yeah. And if anyone has any questions about the conference, put them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. I mean, this isn't about the conference, this stream, but, you know, since we're here, I can answer them. And we can get on to the actual videos. Welcome, it stands to reason as well. Cool. Okay. Let's get into it. So the first one I wanted to go into is this one. So, not everything's lined up correctly. Let me just bring this out. Boom. Okay, that should be lined up correctly now. Okay, so the first one is anti-natalism, and Dylan from NM is calling in. NM, I'm assuming that's one of the states. Anyway, cool. Let's get into it. Let me know, as always, if there's any audio issues. One thing I am going to say is the stream, the chat, when it gets busy, I can't keep track of everything that's going on. So if you do want to send a message that you want to make sure I see, or ask a question or anything like that, that I'll 100% see and respond to, then send it via a donation in the link at the top. I'm not like doing that to intentionally like privilege any specific people's questions or anything like that. It's just, I would like to get to everything in the chat, but like sometimes it gets super busy, and if I was going to respond to everything in the chat, it would literally just be a stream of me going like that, looking at the chat. So yeah, hopefully you can understand. And yeah, send anything there that you 100% want me to see, but I will try to keep my eye on the chat as well. Cool. Anyway, let's go with this first one. So this is Dylan calling in about anti-natalism.
Calling in from New Mexico. Dylan, what's going on?
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Awesome. So actually, I wanted to touch on something that I heard on the Humanize Me podcast this week, which is run by Bart Campolo, and I first found out.
I actually think I listened to that podcast, and because I remember that, I think if I'm thinking of the right one, they did do 2 episodes on anti-natalism, and I remember being disappointed by them, but I can't remember why.
About Bart Campolo when he was a guest host on your podcast.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to connect the dots there.
Yeah, Bart's really cool. I've obviously had several conversations with him and
Super
stuff.
cool
And
guy.
if I ever got married, I would love for Bart to do my wedding, because I know he does that, and just having him at his wedding would be cool. But yeah, he's a really neat guy. Definitely has a cool podcast too. But what on the podcast did you hear that you want to talk about?
Well, he was talking about anti-natalism, and he wasn't really talking about it as much as he was trashing it, which was surprising to me because he's such an open-minded guy. You know, really hit me, really cut me deep. He's become, after seeing him on Truth Wanted, he's become one of my personal heroes, somebody that I look up to as an icon of open-mindedness and empathy and reason as well.
You know, that's interesting. I don't know what it is, but there is a kind of a response to anti-natalism right off the bat that people just kind of mistrust it, and it always comes from parents. It always comes from parents, which is fine. Yep. It's totally understandable, but it doesn't surprise me that Bart would take that route, although I would be curious to what he has to say. But anyway.
Well, it's worth listening to, and the reason I really wanted to bring it up is because he ended the episode by putting out an open call for anti-natalists, and I was like,
"Oh shoot!
Talk to Objectively Dan."
Yeah, I guess I gotta go.
Oh right, so is Objectively Dan is openly an anti-natalist then? I didn't realize that. Completely missed me by. I mean, I don't know if he's changed his views since. Because I can't remember, in the clip I watched, where it was only published 3 months ago, I'm pretty sure he doesn't confirm he is, but it sounds like he's sympathetic to it. But maybe I'm misremembering. But that's cool then.
So, and ask him some questions. But I also wanted to talk about, and maybe I was thinking, I wanted to kind of switch what I had put in the notes, but it's up to y'all, whatever you think is more interesting. I would either want to discuss how to further that conversation, or I was talking with my brother today, and he has 2 children, biological children that he procreated with his wife. And we came up with some...
That's such an odd way of putting it. Someone procreated their children with... I mean, I know that is what they did, but it's a bit of a weird way of putting it. Also, Dan Bright is in the chat, and also, sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but the last person who messaged in the chat, thank you for watching and welcome to the chat.
Practical benefits for adoption for the entire world society, but I couldn't think of any practical problem. I couldn't think of anything, any way at all that society is hurt by adoption.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the other thing first, since it's the first thing you brought up. So I don't know what Bart actually said. Obviously, I don't know what his point.
I actually just want to quickly go back and see what the end of that.
Any way at all that society is hurt by adoptions.
Right. So this one's interesting. So actually, I can't see any way that society is hurt by adoption per se, like in the abstract as an idea. But I have... So there was a debate I was at, and it was on the topic of anti-natalism, and adoption came up as, like an alternative. And I was saying, I think, adoption is a good thing. And someone at the debate club, welcome to the chat, Basil, someone pushed back on that, and they were saying, well, actually, they don't think adoption is as rosy as people purport, because they said that it can set up incentive structures that well, there's a couple of things. It can set up essentially, it can incentivize an incentive. It can put in place or establish an incentive structure that causes people to want to acquire children to put into the adoption system, because it can make them money. Now, this will depend how you set up the adoption system, and it can also incentivize parents to actually disown or give up their children at a young age, and because they know there's an adoption system there that they can put them into, sort of relieve them of their responsibilities. Now, I can understand someone who would make that point. I can understand those points. I think, like, we live in a very complex world, and there's no solutions in this world. There are only this is a quote by someone, I think it's Thomas Sowell. Despite whatever people think about him, but one of the quotes from him, I think, is something like, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, which is true. Every decision you make, even if it's something that you see as promoting a good, there will be some trade-offs. If nothing else, it's simply a trade-off of your time and effort putting it in place, and money and resources, right? So one of the trade-offs that someone could say is that it's a good thing to put an adoption system in place, because you help those children, who need adopting, and that is a large amount of children. And then you could also say a secondary benefit is that there will be many people, or there will be some people that would have procreated, but given there's adoption system, they go through the official system and adopt instead. So it's sort of like you're helping those kids out, and you may be indirectly causing like less, biological reproduction. But then because there's a trade-off, that you can accept that good from the thing you're establishing, but also recognize that it can also result in some incentive structures that can cause harm. So depending on the adoption system you establish, and I'm no expert in this, but presumably, I don't know if every adoption system would be liable to this, but at least some, they could set up incentive structures where essentially you can have sort of like a for-profit child trafficking sort of system that feeds into the adoption system. A bit like how a lot of people criticize like a for-profit prison system, because it incentivizes, the profit incentive incentivizes either long sentences or getting more people into prison. So someone could make the same critique about an adoption system, and also, it leaving the door open to people being absolved of their responsibilities to raise their child, because it gives them the option of just like, I'm washing my hands, you can go off to the adoption system. Now, I don't know if it is that simple in reality, but when this person said this, I thought, it's a valid. I don't think it's a critique of adoption, but I think it's a valid consideration to take into account when you're talking about adoption, because when you talk about something, you've got to recognize both the goods and the bads. So yeah, I can't actually remember what the guy's question was originally, but I think it's interesting. Basil is straight in there. The Pumping Seagull, thank you so much. Again with 10 Canadian dollars, or should we call them Canny D's? I don't know if that is actually a thing. But thank you so much, Basil. It's really going to help cover all the costs of things. Well, like, stuff like the new lighting system, and, all the like stuff we need for the conference, and just going forward for the YouTube channel and everything. So not everything can be announced at the moment, but yeah, all of the donations are going to a worthy place, should we say. But thank you so much. And Basil says, the primary reason people have kids, men are programmed to really want to, should we say, spaff themselves inside at all costs. Women are programmed to want a bundle of joy inside, hence adoption will be necessary no matter what. Yeah, I mean, I think as long as there are humans around, there's going to be a need to for adoption. I agree with that. I think like anti-natalists will probably remain a small minority of people for as long as humans are around, and there will always be kids who need adopting as long as humans are around. And so an additionally good thing that anti-natalists can do is adopt. Now, will the best use of every anti-natalist time in terms of making the world a better place be adoption? No, but there will be some antinatalists who will be really well suited to being a parent. And I think, given that there are so many children out there, and they may not, and they may have they may be interested in being a parent, and they may not really have interest in other things that may do good in the world. So one good thing they can do is adopt. And obviously all the critiques that we've just mentioned, recognized. It will be good to see more antinatalists adopting, I think. One, because it just does a good in and of itself, but also I think it will help shift the bad rap that antinatalists get as doomers, and it actually shows that antinatalists are willing to put in the effort and try and make the world a better place. And also it fights the whole thing of like antinatalists hate kids, because how are you going to hate kids and adopt one? Do you get what I mean? Like that wouldn't go together. So I think it would help all those things, but obviously primarily it would it would be good because you're helping that child. But thank you so much, Basil, for that. JE also says, so true. I think about this a lot. There's no solution to this world and no saving this world, only trade-offs for real. Great quote. Yeah, I also think it's a good quote. And I think it's accurate as well. I think a lot of people go around talking as if there are solutions that we can like materialize for a whole range of things, and there just aren't. There will always be trade-offs. Even if there is something that you can basically practically solve, those resources will be taken away from something else that will either remain for longer or get worse as a result of not having those resources. So yeah, it is just trade-offs. But let's continue.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the other thing first, since it's the first thing you brought up. So I don't know what Bart actually said. Obviously, I don't know what his points or positions are. So it's hard to kind of look at that, just because of the nature of the show that we're doing now. But I'll put it this way, because you were interested in how to further that conversation, and my only suggestion is just make sure you're getting past just the definition. And you're really kind of explaining yourself, because I think after you it's a shocking thing for a lot of people. I was actually talking to some fellow content creators, ones that you definitely know the names of, and other people probably know. But I don't know if they want me to say that I had conversation with. Maybe they would say it later. I don't know. But they actually didn't know about my anti-natalist tendencies, and they were really surprised.
Right. So okay. So he is. I actually didn't know that. So. Yeah, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with him, actually.
Because I talk about it on here, that just shows that they don't watch my show, but that's fine. But I had conversations with them, and I at least had some headway with them. They weren't going to call themselves anti-natalists, but they definitely understood me once they really got the arguments down. Because it's like we're saying, like nobody is going to look at beliefs or look at things to disconfirm what they already believe is true. Like that's just not something most people really do. And so when you have somebody else who is a real life person talking to them about this kind of stuff, it just makes it that much easier. So I don't know about Bart's case. Maybe I have to be the one to go call up Bart and get on his show to talk about it. But like if to talk about it in people in general, it's like, yeah, just put it out there, move the Overton window a little bit in being that, have that be a conversation to have, and then see what people respond to it. Because I find that more people will agree with you once they really understand a lot of anti-natalist positions, once they really know what it is. Because I think a lot of people are kind of confused about what it is.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you actually have an honest conversation with a lot of people, you'll find more common ground than they would expect to have with you. Because like there is common ground with pretty much everyone, not actually everyone, but damn near everyone probably, because most people are at least selective natalists. Like there are some cases they recognize, like, yeah, that would be bad to create that person if we know that that's going to be their future. If you're in a gulag, or if you know your kid is going to have some debilitating disease or something like that, like it's very common for people to recognize that it would be a bad move to create someone and put them in that situation. And I think if you have an honest conversation about why they believe that, and then say, well, what about the ordinary everyday harms that people go through? And also the fact that everyone, even your average person on the street, when they're created, has the risk of, you know, having a life that's going to be extremely bad, as bad as, you know, the gulag or the bad medical condition or whatever, you know. And I think if you just have an honest conversation with someone and they are open-minded and, you know, they haven't got their barriers up and stuff, I think most average people will find that they've got more common ground with, you know, this viewpoint than they actually initially would have thought
in the first place. But Ian, do you know what anti-natalism is? Are you in this conversation?
You know, I do and I don't. I mean, my perception of it is very limited, and I mean, it's basically people who believe that having children is immoral. Is that kind of the idea?
So I think that's one. I think that's a pretty common perception of it. The idea that having children in the world is. Yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
I like to use the analogy that calling an anti-natalist somebody who thinks birth is bad is like calling an atheist somebody who claims there are no gods.
Okay.
And I really, that's part of the conversation that my brother has a son that's 3 years old now. And today was the first day that I used the word anti-natalist to describe myself to him, because it can be so touchy.
Right.
And I swear it's so interesting.
I'm not sure if he was speaking about he called himself an anti-natalist to his brother or his brother's kid. I'm assuming it's his brother, given the kid's only 3 years old.
In my notes, I have how to shift the Overton window, and
yeah,
I think one of the things that me and my brother were talking about was maybe keying in, focusing in on that title anti-natalist and reclaiming it, or subverting it and describing myself, and possibly you as well, objectively, Dan, as non-natalists or a-natalist. Because
a-natalist. I like a-natalist.
Anti actually says anti, right? I mean, it's anti. A could mean, like you're saying, you're not an anti-theist, or you're an atheist. So,
and isn't it silly how?
Right. So maybe these guys aren't anti-natalists then. Maybe I don't know. It would just be really like useful if they actually just said what they think. But
so much of our communication just relies on the simple words that we use rather than the actual arguments themselves. Like, so many people get caught up on the word atheist without.
So the question for me though is are you advocating that you don't want to have kids, or are you advocating that no one should be able to have kids, or are you just saying if people didn't have kids, things would be better? Like, what exactly?
So I'll say this, right? In the same way that you talk to a vegan might give a different response as to whether or not they think it's a personal choice for themselves and whether they think other people should do it, right? That's going to vary between vegan to vegan, and that's going to vary between anti-natalists as well, as how far a policy like that should go. I should say most anti-natalists out there aren't advocating for a child-free policy statewide. You know, that's not really a thing. Maybe in an emergency circumstance, I could see that definitely happening, but for the most part, it is a personal choice. But it is one that I would, is based on some moral reasoning is part of it, along with kind of environmental ethics and, a bunch of other things. But it's more than just thinking it's bad. It can be kind of a complex matrices of different reasons. Without getting too much into it, without making this an anti-natalist podcast, maybe we have to dedicate a whole episode to it, because every single time, Dylan, every single time this subject comes up, I get more feedback on this than anything else I talk about.
To be fair, like, it is a topic that really interests people. I think because to a lot of people who are there's two things. For your average person, it's just this bizarre point of view they've never come into contact with, and so I think a lot of people are interested in it for that reason. And then the people who are more sort of clued into like discussions and philosophical like debates and discuss sort of ethics with people, antinatalism is, I would say, probably still quite a fringe conversation. Like, the people watching and me, we're very used to talking about it, but like my perception is that it's still a fringe topic, which does mean that a lot of people who have, you know, debates about ethics and stuff like that, when antinatalism comes up, it's still something like, you know, a bit different, a bit refreshing, and actually interesting. You know, it's not like some ethical topic like abortion that like everyone's argued to death. Do you get what I mean? So, and I definitely had this experience when I was there was a conference that I went to with a friend at the start of the year, and we did a presentation on antinatalism among other things. And yeah, our like presentation we gave was, so I was there for 2 out of the 3 days, and I attended all of the sessions in those 2 days. So I don't know what happened on the third, but I attended all in the 2 days. And our presentation, and I know obviously I'll be biased, but I actually think this is the case, just based on the number of people who asked questions and how keen they were and stuff like that. Our presentation was the most popular in terms of engagement. I'm not saying everyone agreed with it, although we did actually have, I would say at least like 10 to 20% of the room showed positive, like a positive perception of the idea, if not fully signed up. This was at a misanthropy conference. But yeah, nonetheless, even if people disagreed, we had the most engaged question and answer session. People came up to me afterwards and were asking loads of questions. A guy he's a father, he came up to me afterwards and he was asking me loads of questions. He's an academic from the UK. It was super interesting. Yeah, even the keynote speaker of the whole what do you call it, conference, you know, spoke to me and my friend afterwards. So yeah, it is a topic that people find really interesting and want to talk about.
More emails about this than anything else.
Oh.
Anything else? Isn't that weird?
Well, cool.
I guess
that's
because people aren't talking about it. Yeah, I don't know.
And welcome Katie to the chat as well. I don't think I've missed anyone else.
I think that's awesome. I think that's exactly what I was hoping for. I'm amazed that that's the case, because that's what we need. We need this discussion to be normalized. That's the first.
Yeah, I agree. Like, even if people aren't going to agree, like, obviously no one should be forced to agree with antinatalism, but I think it's a conversation everyone should have, because like it's a viewpoint that is very relevant to a decision that the vast majority of people will consider in their lives and take an action on. And it's a very important decision, you know, both for yourself, but also for the person you're creating. It's the most important thing you can do, to the most significant thing. And I think, like, at the moment, there is just an orthodoxy of it's fine, don't question it, be happy. And if you want to have that viewpoint, that's fine, but there needs to be a discussion about it, given it's such a big thing. And I just don't see why someone would say, no, people should not discuss it. This should not be a conversation. Like, everything should be open for discussion. And I think this is a really important one to have. Florin joined the chat as well. Welcome, Florin.
Step, I think, is I don't think everyone should be forced to adopt. I don't think everyone should.
But like, why even say that? Who's saying? Like, when you say, I don't think everyone should be forced to adopt, like, when you say that and no one has been advocating for that, it sounds suspicious. So just don't throw yourself in that hole.
Be forced to not adopt. But I think everyone should consider it. Everyone should sit down with their partner before they procreate and shoot their cum or whatever. Sorry. I just think it's so silly that people get so attached to these biological, you know, trait. They're like, I want my child to look like me. It's like, I don't need to love somebody. I mean, I don't need somebody to look like me for me to love them.
Yeah.
And
I frame it like this too, Dylan. I frame it like this. It's like the decision for me whether or not to have kids is ultimately going to be a moral one. And to convince me that I should have kids, I have to go through these ethical considerations. And to me, it doesn't make sense for me to have kids when I have the option of adopting. And so when I want to start a family, if
yeah, this guy has a very level-headed approach to it. Like, even if he disagreed, like, he recognizes the fact that this is a decision that falls into the like moral arena, and I need to think about it in that way.
That's in the cards for me. Then that's just going to be my go-to, unless somebody can convince me otherwise. It's just what makes the most sense to me. So
it's funny because I have one kid, but I've always said, and I will, and it's not a judgment call. I've always said that people who have to have kids, kind of like Dylan was just saying, to me, it's a really selfish thing. Not it's a selfish thing in that people want the kid. They want a kid that looks like them. They want a little mini me, and I'll admit, on some level,
I'm getting the vibe that this is just going to be a back patting sort of session. So I'm going to put it on 1.25 to get through it a bit quicker.
I'm guilty of that as well.
Because I want to find some substance to actually like get into.
We only have one kid and I only want one kid. But I remember having this conversation back when China had their 2-child law was like the thing that went out. And I'm not saying they did everything ethically, like killing girls and all. I mean, that's not right. But I agree with the idea and agreed with the idea of, hey, if the population's crazy, put a limit on, replacement value for yourself and for your spouse or whatever the deal is. Like, that makes the population even. And I got so much kickback from people that I know that were like, we should be able to have 20 kids if we want. And I would say, well, why don't you adopt? 20 kids. There's tons of kids out there. And it's always the religious people who want to stop you from having abortions. They don't want to adopt, and they want 30 kids and they all have to be theirs. And it's just a weird, to me, I wouldn't say I'm anti-natalist at all. I have a kid, but to me, it's just such a weird, selfish position of it's got to be from me. It's got to be. And I don't understand that. And I don't understand why people are so upset about it.
Well, we'll add, Ian, you can still be an anti-natalist and still have a kid. I would say that's not necessarily mutually exclusive. Just
yeah, because I mean, I've done a panel with anti-natalist parents.
Put that out there. Just put it out there. But yeah, I think you're totally right. It's like there is this idea of you want somebody that looks like you, or like I literally heard some people that just say, I just want a baby because they're cute, or a kid because they're cute, and it's like, wow,
that's so shallow.
That's pretty bad too. But it's like that is a complex human being that you're talking about. This isn't a product that you buy at the store that looks good for your aesthetic, right? Like this is we're talking about a life here. And like I wish there are also just some people that just should not be parents. I'm totally convinced of that as well. I'm not going to sterilize them, but I might say like, hey, like maybe consider some other options for yourself.
But you have to have a test to drive. Why don't we have a driver's license test? You could have a
yeah. I mean that's one way. I think that would never pass in this country, but a man can dream. A man can dream. In Dantopia, that might be a good idea.
It's funny because like I've seen like anti-natalists get big pushback for even suggesting like some sort of license or like criteria someone has to meet, and here you have like an actual parent saying that.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say something, but I think I've been talking a bit too much about this clip, so let's keep going.
We'll see. Anyway, Dylan, we talked a lot about anti-natalism. I don't know if that's exactly where you wanted the conversation to go, but was there anything else you wanted to get out of the way before I go on to the next call here?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention that. So the two positives that me and my brother, and once again, my brother has 2 children, but we had a nice discussion about this. We identified that, for one, it's known that having children is bad for the environment. That's about the worst thing you can do to the environment. And the other positive we saw from adoption is that it frees up resources for other.
Okay, I don't think there's going to be amazing amount to get into for the rest of that chat. So let's get into this one. This one's going to be interesting because it's got Cosmic Skeptic on it. Now,
I do want to get to our last caller for tonight.
Ooh. So this one is, again, just called Anti-natalism. It's Capia from Bolivia phoning in. So this one's going to be interesting because it's Alex O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic, on as a guest. Now, he has spoken about this topic before. I actually did a stream reacting to it, or one of the things, actually. So he, if anyone doesn't know, his YouTube channel name now is Alex O'Connor. You can find his channel. But he's done 2 things, if I'm remembering correctly, on anti-natalism. One is he had a discussion with Humane Hancock, which was them just discussing. And he actually then also he runs a podcast, or I mean, it hasn't been. Well, no, it rebranded, didn't it? So now it's called like the Within Reason podcast. But when it was called the Cosmic Skeptic podcast, he had David Benatar on it. And I did watch that when it first came out, but I'm yet to actually go back and review it. But anyway, so actually at this point, I don't know if he'd had either of those things. So when's this? This is 4 years ago. Okay, so I don't think actually either of those videos would have been done by then, because I think those are more recent than 4 years ago. So maybe this is the first time he's talking about it publicly, but I'm not sure.
And please tell me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. This is Katia in Bolivia. I believe this is the first call I've ever received from Bolivia. Katia, what is going on?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. How's it going?
Okay. Well, good. That's not my name.
Okay.
It's okay.
All right. So I do have a call screener that gets our name down. So please tell us your name.
So my name is Capilla, and yeah, with P as potato.
Okay, Capilla. All right, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, it's the name of a mountain, so it's okay. Don't worry.
I wish I was named after a mountain. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, so I just wanted to make a quick comment about the podcast that Alex was saying. I remember when I listened the last episode of his podcast with Peter Singer, I listened first in Spotify, and I was like, I couldn't see any expressions or faces or anything.
I'm not sure what podcast they're talking about actually, but Basil the Pumpkin Seed. I'm never going to be able to take that name seriously. The Pumpkin Seagull. Thank you again so much for 2. Should we call them Canny D's from now on? Thank you again. Really much appreciated, Basil. And Basil says atheists that are pro-natalist are effing clowns. Well, to be fair, a lot of pro-natalists are. But yeah, I think some people have, including me, I find it, very frustrating as well, that a lot of atheists will have been raised religious, right? So at some point they would have been religious. They leave the religion and they become an atheist, and a lot of them then go around very confidently saying that they've put dogma and ideology behind them. And then they comment on this topic, and it's so obvious that they haven't, or they've traded one way of religious thinking for another way of religious thinking. So often you find with a lot of atheists, instead of referring to God in all of their arguments, they refer to the universe or something like that, the universe or nature or something like that. So I think a lot of people get very frustrated with the fact that those people claim they've sort of left certain things behind when actually they haven't, and it becomes very apparent on this topic. But thank you so much again, Basil. I
could only listen to the audio, and I thought I don't know. I just like, I have a lot of respect for Peter Singer, and at first it sounded as if it was like too, I don't know. It was like, I don't know how to say, but it just sounded as, I don't know if he was taking it in the good side or not. I was like, I don't know if I would say that. And then I watched it again in YouTube, and I was like, oh, so they are actually like just talking, and I think both of them are enjoying this talk. But just with the audio itself, sometimes I don't know. I was just a little bit scared of, oh my God, I would probably be more like, I don't know, soft if I would be, I don't know, maybe disagreeing and things like that. But I don't know. It was just an interesting experience. So, but it was really great. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks. I would certainly disagree, but a lot of people have said like, God, that was more of a debate than a discussion. It's like, well, that's what I'm trying to do here. I figure, look, I'm never going to see this man again. Probably the chances are, I mean, it's Peter Singer, for goodness sake, and I've got him in my room. Like, I'm probably never going to really have this experience again.
Get all your grievances out right then and there.
Like, yeah,
right?
I'm going to have an argument with you. So I'm going to ask you the questions that I want to ask you.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah,
but he did take it in good spirit. I mean, Peter Singer is not the most expressive of people in the world.
Yeah, I mean, like, if Peter Singer wasn't going to take that in good spirit, like, he is one of the biggest philosophers in the world. Like, you kind of got to take like a bit of kickback every now and again, right? Or very commonly.
Oh, he's not there flailing his arms and everything. But it was reassuring to see him smile every now and again.
Yes, me too. I was like, wow, okay, so this was completely different than what I first pictured.
Well, the thing about Singer is that he is totally rationally detached, right? It's one of the weird things about him. You read a lot of articles that are written about him, and people criticize him for it. Like when he talks about the ethics of infanticide, or the ethics of, or like his mother got some kind of terminal illness or something once, or maybe it wasn't terminal. I don't know what it was, but he was kind of interviewed about it. And he talks about it so coldly and so detached. When he talks about animal suffering, it's never like, look at the animals and how much they're suffering. It's a purely rationalistic approach. So I figured, look, if I sit here and totally try to break down what you're saying and ask you whether you think the slave trade or the animal industry is worse, you're not the type of person to go like, oh man, God, that's heavy. I don't know if I want to answer that. He'll just kind of, it's like putting it into a calculator. He just kind of thinks it through and talks it. And that's one of the things I respect so much about him. I don't know if that's why you respect him as well, but that's something I love so much about his writings. They're so candid. They're so emotionally detached, which isn't always a good thing, but it's a necessary perspective, I think.
I think it gives you the I don't know how to say, like the right like logical thing that you're looking for. Sometimes you usually, like I for like, just for as an example, I think I sometimes get persuaded by emotions, and I am looking for something that it means like that it's how can I say, something that seems concrete and not just being like maybe persuaded because I empathize with something, but I just want some like good reasons for something. So I think that's perfect for the things that he talks about.
Even though I would say emotions are a part of our logical reasoning, but that's something for another time.
I know what you mean. That's why I'm now a vegan. It's like I've known for a very long time that, you know,
well, this didn't age well, did it?
Animal suffering sucks, and then it goes on in factory farming. It's like, yeah, sure, you can show me as many documentaries as you want about how animals are treated, and I'm like, yeah, that sucks, and it tugs at my heartstrings or whatever. But it wasn't until I read Singer's Animal Liberation and just saw this purely rational approach. There was no kind of, look at how bad this is, you should feel awful, look into this puppy's eyes. It's like, it was just a purely moral analysis, and that's what made me go, actually, yeah, I do have a moral obligation to do this. It was just purely, if there's such thing as ethical truth, then here it is on a plate. You know, literally, it's not some kind of emotional plea. So I think I know what you mean, and it's something that I'm sympathetic to as well.
Sweet. Well, as much as I do like talking about this conversation, I do have a note here, Kapia, that says that you want to discuss anti-natalism.
Yes. So I know it's a little hard, but I hope I make myself clear or understandable. I will try. So my experience, like growing up, I think it was more about like trying to figure out morality and for like, how can I, like, constructing my own morality. My family is not very religious. Maybe they are superstitious. Some of them are religious, but I wasn't never forced into a religion. And I just kind of tried to copy from like good things from everything that I saw. And then at one point it was more about like, I think I was very concerned about suffering and especially animals, because we used to raise some chickens and things like that. And grandma used to kill them and eat them later. So we were like, it was hard. And with that, I think I didn't really care much about atheism. And as something like, I guess because I was trying to just find what was my morality for me. I think kind of like that intersected with atheism at some point, because they were usually like, or at least non-religious people are kind of like trying to make up their own system. That seems good for them. So within this kind of questioning, I think there was a point where I was also thinking about what's the morality of having children, and I feel like a lot of the things like how can I say, with veganism especially, I have been a vegan for a long time now, and it's hard to change people's thoughts or like force people to maybe try to be more I don't know. Try to support more like a less cruel life for animals, or try to see that, make them change the way they live, or understand that maybe they should look for a less.
I know when you know someone's not used to speaking in public and they're calling into a show, sometimes, you know, they get nervous, and like I've had this, like I called into a radio show once and completely fucked it. But that was many years ago. Yeah, it sometimes it's frustrating because it's like you don't know when they're going to get to the point, and it's like you can't really skip ahead because there's no time markers, and like, you know, it all just looks the same. Basil is shooting the shots. The seagull is pumping. Thank you so much, Basil. It's I'm gonna have to come up with a unique to you way of saying thank you that's very concise, so I'll work on that. But thanks so much, Basil. And Basil says, I don't think vegans realize that plants aren't making their goodies for us. Lol. I don't think that lettuce enjoys that we rip it out of the ground and eat it. Well, I don't think lettuce enjoys or doesn't enjoy anything. Like, as far as I can see, and I'm not aware of any sort of credible scientific literature that shows or even suggests that plants can suffer. Obviously, if you look at like a plant that's just growing, you're saying like they're not goodies for us. Like, yeah, I mean, the plant doesn't grow to be eaten by a human, but it's like a stone doesn't exist to be, for example, like thrown by a human. But picking up and throwing a stone, like, it doesn't negatively morally impact the stone, if you get what I mean. So it's the same with the plant, like using a cabbage or a lettuce or something like that. Sure, it doesn't exist for us in any cosmic sense, but when it comes to ethics, I don't think that's sort of really neither here nor there. But yeah, I just think if we get to a point where we find out that actually plants can suffer in some way, then that is going to be really serious. But at the moment, I don't see any evidence. No central nervous system. No nociceptors. No brain. It also wouldn't really make evolutionary sense for plants to feel pain, because obviously evolutionarily pain is a signaling mechanism saying this is harming you, remove yourself from this or stop doing the thing that is causing you harm. But you kind of need to be able to move to do that. Not necessarily in all cases, but generally you kind of need to be able to move away from the threat. So for example, if there's like a fire near you, animals will, if they get burnt or they feel the heat or whatever, it will cause them pain. They'll then move away from it. A plant can't do that. So it seems odd that they would have evolved and it would have been selected for that they feel pain, because the pain wouldn't really serve a purpose for them, because they wouldn't be able to actually utilize it in any way, given their immobility, if you get what I mean. But, never say never. If it turns out they have evolved the capacity to suffer, and they have completely different mechanisms for doing that to us, then it should be taken seriously. But yeah. Cool. Right. Let's and Manic is also in the chat. I just realized there's a new, and Naturalist Ted as well. Welcome to the chat. Let's keep going.
Damaging way to consume their food. And also I used to participate with like food waste recovery groups in college. I lived all my life in Bolivia, but I went to college to the US. And it was just incredibly, like, I don't know, it was very surprising for me to see how much food is wasted and how much food is missing in my country.
And a Pocolex, if I'm getting that right, welcome to the chat.
And it was just something that's like, I don't know, like every new person that like gets, is born is completely different. You don't know if they're going to learn from your values, if they're going to want to have the same values that you have, even if they're like your children. They can think completely different, because sometimes we were like probably born from very Christian or religious groups, and then you find out you are atheist, and you reject certain values that you have, and maybe there's good reason. Yes, it's a rational reason, but some people just they can choose not to follow the values that you teach them, even though they might be more rational or not. I just feel like there's so much risk on bringing new life sometimes, and I don't think it's something that we should. I would not say that people should not have children, but I feel like it's just such a big risk in a way that like the amount of trash that means like the amount of trash that gets accumulated for one person, like let's say person.
It's unfortunate they've gone down the environmental route, but
will live 70 years. I don't know how much trash will that cause. I don't know if they're going to decide to be vegan or not, even if I would like teach them. And I feel like it's just, besides all that, I have like my own experience, and maybe it's not the like the most, how can I say, objective experience, right? Because it's just my own experience. So I try to think like all the suffering that we have to go through, even though we are like probably we have better lives than other animals, but still there are a lot of things that we have to go through, and we don't know.
Sure.
It's just too much risk for me to think like it doesn't seem very good as a person, like for me to consider having children for these reasons. But I don't know. What do you think about?
Yeah, it's frustrating because she's talking about risk, but she's not talking about risk to the child. At least if she did, I missed it. But she's talking about risk of like things that they could be that would harm others, if you get what I mean, or do bad things externally.
Like antinatalism. I don't know. I cannot pronounce it.
Anti-natalism is how it's commonly pronounced, but I'll go ahead and start, I suppose. So I think I've come to the conclusion now that I am anti-natalist in the sense that I don't have any interest in producing children of my own. My girlfriend and I've talked about this a lot. We've decided if anything, we'll adopt, and we kind of almost feel an obligation to adopt in some sense because for all the
Right. Okay. So he's elaborated on it a bit more here after that other clip. So it doesn't seem that he's like a philosophical anti-natalist. He just uses the term as like, I think it's better to not do this because there's the adopting alternative, maybe.
reasons that you mentioned, the unpredictability of human life in conditions when growing up, the environmental impact that having new children has. A lot of people don't take that into consideration, but like having a kid, I mean, it takes up a lot of resources especially when they're firstborn, but also just how they're interacting with the world. You're bringing one person in that's taking stuff away. I mean, yeah, are there people who come into the world who produce and do a lot of great things? Absolutely, but you can't predict that, at least not right now on the onset when someone's being born and put into a family and stuff like that. So yeah, for myself, I agree with you for the exact same reasons, I think. And I was talking with Christy about this the other day because it sounds like it's an emotional argument. At least a lot of people interpret it that way because they think like, oh, you just don't want kids for personal reasons. It's actually like, no, I think you can actually come up with some obligations or at least some principles that if you agree with, like you would kind of come to that understanding that, hey, like maybe the desire to have kids can be fulfilled in other more productive ways that aren't bringing unnecessary harm to people. And so for me, that solution is adopting. I think a lot of people that stance, but yeah, I don't know Alex's take on this.
I mean, you say that some people will not have children as a kind of emotional, personal decision. Well, look, I mean, I want to have kids. I really want to have kids, but I have to recognize that that is a totally selfish desire. I mean, it's not the case as much as I'd like to kind of say it is. It's like, yeah, I want to bring in a kid in the world so that I can give it all the pleasurable experiences. Well, that's only, remember, my ethics, my meta ethics is that everything is a derivative of my own pleasure. So if it will actually maximize my pleasure to have children, if I think it will maximize my pleasure, then I actually can't help but do so because of the free will argument that I make. But like, ethically, this is a minefield, right? And it's interesting to compare it to the animal issue, because in the same way that when people started talking about animal ethics, people thought it was ridiculous and a bit niche and a bit kind of, oh, that's very trendy. You know, if YouTube was around back then, it would be the kind of like interesting thing that sometimes comes up in a Q&A, like, but maybe it should be something that we should be taking a hell of a lot more seriously. To me, it is tied in. It's irreversibly tied to the question of whether life is worth living in general. So it's tied to like the rationale and the.
Well, I mean, so in his discussion he has with Humane Hancock, they do actually emphasize this distinction. But obviously, when he says a life worth living there, he may be confusing starting with continuing, and obviously there's a difference. But we'll see if he sort of distinguishes there.
And the appropriateness of suicidality. And they're not the same question, because there's a difference between preventing life from beginning and causing it to end, but both are kind of justified for the same reasons.
Yeah, exactly. It's like not having a kid and killing someone are not the same thing, obviously.
And I don't look at this in an emotional lens. Again, let's look at this this rationally, right? If we think that pleasure is the basis of morality, which a lot of ethicists do, even if I would say so, even if they don't realize it, then it's a simple calculus. The calculus can't practically be made, but let's say if human life is net suffering, then it would imply that that's not worth living. So it's best not to bring it into the world.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument. That's not necessarily the whole. Like, that's not what the anti-natalist point rests on. It's just that would compound the point. That would make it stronger. if it was actually net, overall bad. Basil again with 5 canny Ds. What a legend. Says, my kid will disappear when it dies. Also, I really want to have a kid. So much for being rational. Who said that? Did Cosmic Skeptic say that? I might be missing on that one. But I get your point. Like, so my kid will disappear when it dies. I mean, that is just like a massive euphemism for what you're putting on someone else. Like, when, a lot of people say like, oh, if I have a kid and they don't like it, they can just, off themselves. Or someone would say, my kid disappears when they die. And it just completely smooths over the actual ethical detail of the whole situation. Like, no, like you're putting someone in a position where they could slowly die of cancer. Or like if they don't like their life, you're putting them in a position where they have to jump off a building or shoot themselves or do something else that's going to be even more painful. Given that in the vast majority of places, you don't have access to the right to die. And even if you did, obviously there's still more conversation to be had, but it's not as easy as just saying, I'll have a kid, and if they don't like it, they can kill themselves.
And if it's net pleasure, then it's best to do so. That's kind of the calculation we're making. The thing is, like, the thing is, we obviously can't know the answer to that. There are two ways of looking at it. There's the individual basis and saying, is this individual's life going to be net pleasure or net suffering? I think there's a good argument to be made that everybody, regardless of who you are, lives with a net suffering, that suffering is the affirmative thing in life, in which case the anti-natalist position makes sense. Another way to look at it is to say, well, maybe there are many people who do have a net pleasure, but overall as a population of the world, on average, the suffering is the net, and therefore it's best to cull the entire population because because the average of the entire population. That's kind of a different way.
Well, I mean, I disagree with Cole, but I mean, I get the point he's trying to make. I don't think he actually meant go out and kill everyone.
Looking at it, because in that framework, there are people who genuinely experience more pleasure than pain, but we're still going to stop having kids because the average will be the average will be reduced. But I'm interested in something like, let's take the kind of ethicists who think that something like personal choice and human rights are the pinnacle of ethics. And what we really want to do is give people the choice. One of the anti-natalist talking points is to say, I never chose to come into existence. And because I feel like my life is more suffering than pleasure, I'm kind of, I'm resentful that I was brought into existence, especially because I now can't kill myself because I don't have the emotional ability to do so. So I'd be interested to ask an anti-natalist, how would they feel instead about a world that normalizes suicide? That when someone commits suicide, it's kind of like, it's sad, but it's like right, well, they made that choice. Like everyone's aware of the arguments and they think, well, maybe life isn't worth.
There is an anti-natalist that talks about this quite a lot, called Existential Goof. They're very active on X, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe they run the blog Schopenhauer on Mars. I might be wrong though, but I'm right on the name Existential Goof. They talk about this topic a lot on X.
Living, they thought it wasn't worth living, so they killed themselves. No big deal. So that we can bring people into the world, knowing that they will have a choice when they grow up to decide if they want to continue living or not. And because it's normalized and because it's safely done, it's not like a big kind of scary thing to do. It's kind of people are faced with the choice. How would an anti-natalist feel about giving people the choice to decide whether their life isn't worth living or not by normalizing suicide instead of by culling them from the beginning, if you see what I mean? I mean, yeah. What would you think about a world like that?
I don't know. I'll let Pia talk first. Yeah.
Sorry. I kind of thought about that. And I would be fine with it sometimes. Like I don't mind too much. I don't know it's just I feel like people should have the choice.
I mean, to be honest, I think it doesn't really fundamentally change the dynamics of the topic that you're talking about. Like, all it does is remove one specific or reduce one specific harm, right? Which is the dying process. That's it. It doesn't address anything else. Maybe it would address also death anxiety, but apart from that, like all the other dynamics are in place, and that's just sort of like an additional auxiliary sort of dynamic. So it's strange because you would presume you'd say to someone, okay, well, if we change this core dynamic of the thing you're saying, how would you think about it then? But that's not even a core dynamic. It's like a side one. So Yeah, I don't know.
ways to do whatever they want with their lives. And I don't know, but I don't have any like a philosophical argument for it. I just feel like you were saying something else about anti-natalism. What did you say? Sorry, you go ahead.
Well, so I was just going to say, I would argue that maybe there might be two different comparisons that we're trying to make here, because the difference between someone ending a life that's already there and the life that's being brought into the world are kind of two different things, because the ending of a life that's already there can bring in a kind of suffering. And I am someone who believes in a right to end one's life when one chooses, with huge asterisks there. But end of life scenarios is mostly what I'm thinking of when I'm talking about that, because we're talking about someone who has lived a life, who has experienced things, and whose options are not as great as someone who is younger, who has more potential for things. And whereas if we're talking about someone who isn't even born yet, like the potential isn't even there yet until we make the potential, if that makes sense. And so I think it's a little bit different if we're talking about it in those terms.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you've watched that episode, but Sam Harris had a podcast with an episode with David Benatar.
Yeah.
And they talk a little bit about that. They talk about, I think, pro-mortalism and versus anti-natalism, and they made I think like Dan said, they made that distinction that.
I'll have to listen to that Sam Harris Benatar one again, because I haven't in ages.
One would be like a potential life, like you're not yet born, and you're probably trying to more argue for not having children, but more with like probabilities, right? Like maybe how much likely is it going to have?
Sure.
Yeah, but then I think this is a lot of epistemological beating around the bush. Like, let's talk about the ontology of this. If you're a utilitarian, if you think pleasure should be maximized in all circumstances, like the right thing to do as a matter of like ethical fact, the correct thing to do is maximize pleasure. If that's what you think, let's say it's uncovered tomorrow that every human life has a net suffering rather than a net pleasure. It's not just antinatalism is interesting. It's like, oh, so it turns out that it is an ethical truth. Not only is it like, yeah, maybe we should all kill ourselves and not have children. It's like you have a moral obligation to do so. Like you have a moral obligation to end all life. That is something that needs to just be squarely faced. People kind of talk about.
Well, a lot of people talk about that when they're talking about negative utilitarianism, don't they?
What's the difference between ending life and preventing life? How could we know if pleasure is going to be maximized? That's not the important question. The important question is, can we really say that if we knew for a fact that everyone suffered more than they experienced pleasure, that we should just stop having kids altogether? That's a scary prospect, but we need to talk about it plainly.
But also, I mean, who's gaining the pleasure there? Because it's certainly.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. Like, it's Navasan's dictum. It's like making people happy rather than making happy people. It's like, if you are just creating people simply to serve the universe in producing more well-being, it's like, so these people simply exist only to serve as a means to generating well-being for the universe. It just seems like it seems just almost like quasi-religious, sort of instead of bringing people into the world, go forth and be fruitful. Instead of bringing people into the world to serve God, you're bringing people into the world to serve the universe. But the universe is even in the mindset of religious people, at least God is like this agent who would be happy or sad about that. But it's like in this sort of utilitarian, atheist, materialist version where you're doing it for the universe, like the universe is indifferent. It's just this like, the universe is just this, it's basically, in this context, it's essentially just an arena. It's not an agent. It's not an individual that will, appreciate this sort of, what's that thing where you slide the, not abacus? Is it abacus? I forget. But it just seems like such a weird thing to me that you would create people simply to serve the purpose of increasing overall well-being. Because then you're not doing it to serve that person, you're doing it to serve something outside of them, like the universe. But the universe it's just an arena, it's not even an agent. So it's kind of weird. Like it makes less sense than the religious people doing it, and even that doesn't make sense to me. But it just seems like such a shaky foundation on which to build I'm doing a good thing because I'm increasing the amount of well-being by creating new people who didn't exist to need like benefit from the well-being in the first place, if you get what I mean. what's the in there's a video where a guy talks about it. He's like, if the government dictated to all, so say you have like the Indian government, and they dictate to all the different states in India that you need to increase the level of adherence to safety guidelines, right? Like what people wearing safety helmets when they drive scooters. And then instead of those people, instead of this one, and then one of the states, instead of focusing on trying to get people who already use motorbikes to wear safety helmets, they just get more people to ride motorbikes, but make sure all those new people wear safety helmets. Like that, to me, it's like, yes, okay, it gives the illusion of value of like you're increasing the number of safety helmets being used, just like when you create new people for well-being, it gives this illusion of like of value that there is an increase in well-being, but it's on this like completely hollow foundation of like, well, you're just creating more motorbike riders to serve the purpose of wearing a helmet. Like you're creating more people to serve the purpose of well-being, if you get what I mean. It just seems so odd, because to me the value and well-being is sourced in the person who has a desire for that and who will benefit from that, but there is no one before you create them. But anyway, let's see what this guy says.
The people who are...
it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
No, so the way that the utilitarian will characterize pleasure is synonymous with the absence of pain.
Okay.
So if when we say maximize pleasure, we kind of mean like get the highest score on the points chart. So if the points are on -3, then the way to maximize that is to bring it up to 0, if you know what I mean. It's like if you were living a life that was noticeably just suffering, if you were just suffering all the time, you'd want to kill yourself.
Yes.
Because not because, and you would think of that. The reason you're doing that is because you want to maximize your pleasure. It just so happens that you're in the unfortunate situation that the maximal position you can be in terms of pleasure is dead.
Yeah.
Well, the anti-natalist says that's true of absolutely everybody in every circumstance, and therefore we should all do the same thing. What we need to make sure we don't do is turn around and say, "Oh, that's a bit tricky. Maybe we shouldn't talk about that." I don't know about that. We have to say, look, if we're going to be serious about ethics, then we have to see where it takes us. If ethics obliges us to do something, then there are only two options: either we have to do it, or our ethics are wrong. And either being the case is equally interesting and important. So let's discuss it, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, but I would say that like if you've experienced life, and I don't know, like you said, it's like, it's more, I don't think we have in our biology like a tendency to want to die. I think most animals want to survive, and it's not something that's like, that's our instinct, right? So I would say most people like would probably care if like, even if you would explain them rationally, they would, who are like people who are alive right now, they would probably want to continue their lives. So I would probably like put like that prioritize the existing people's kind of how can I say will. I don't know, that's not.
Yeah, but it's different, right? It's like that that's why I say that although they're related and based on similar philosophies, it's a totally different question, the whole suicidal the rational suicide argument that someone like Schopenhauer would make, and the anti-natalist position, because of this reason. It is the perfect and probably the only strong argument against suicide in a world where suffering is actually maximal, which again we can't know, but let's say we did. The argument against that is to say, well, look, rational beings have a desire to keep living. Okay, problem solved. But nobody has a desire to be born, right? That doesn't exist. That's a nonsense concept. So if the only thing in a world with maximal suffering that would stop people from actively ending their lives is because of the desire to continue living, well, for those who aren't alive yet, they don't have that desire to begin living or to continue living. So that doesn't apply to them. So there's no argument against not bringing them into existence. So we should not do so. And that's the way you could justify the argument of saying we shouldn't all kill ourselves, but we shouldn't have any kids. That's where the difference lies for me. And I'm sympathetic to the argument. But again, it's new. It's something that, man, it like hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like the first time you start thinking about veganism, or start thinking about poverty, or and you think, God, I really didn't comprehend the implications of this.
Yeah, I was the same.
It's something that luckily people are beginning to talk about more. But again, I think that it's going to lead less to people becoming anti-natalist and more to people changing their moral epistemology.
Nadia's in the chat as well. Welcome, Nadia.
Yeah, I think it makes sense the last thing you said, and I think I'm.
If anyone is watching and hasn't said hello in the chat, please do so. It's nice to see who's here.
Like, I'm towards that side. I would probably agree with that, but I do think like adoption and things like that. What Dan said first, like that's probably the best thing to do and things like
I
that.
would
But
agree.
it's just hard to talk with people about it, and that's why I wanted to
Yeah.
bring it up in the episode.
Yeah,
It's
tell
just
me
like,
about it.
yeah.
Because the worst part about it
Hey, Antcraft.
is that if you want to be a good anti-natalist, if you're convinced of the anti-natalist position, it's not just I shouldn't have kids and that's my personal choice. It's like no one should have kids. Like you have a moral obligation to not have kids. And if you really care about, it's kind of like being a vegan. I mean, if you're a vegan philosophically, it's not enough to say I'm going to be vegan, but you do what you want. It's like no, we should all be doing this. This is kind of the argument. And if you're an anti-natalist, the same must apply. So it's very hard to talk to people.
I agree.
Because you're not just saying, hey, I'm not going to have kids and that's my choice. Everyone goes, well, good for you. It's like I'm not going to have kids.
It's kind of baffling, though, that a lot of people are surprised when someone holds an ethical position and they think that other people should also be doing that. Because this is like, it's like I haven't listed out all the different ethical positions that people commonly hold, but it's like, is this not just the case for like nearly all of the ethical positions we have? Like everyone, well, not everyone, but like the vast majority of people have the ethical position that it is wrong to hit a kid, right? Obviously some people still do that. Those people are bastards, but like most people will believe, that I should not be hitting a kid, but they also believe like no one should be doing that, right? And it's like there are so many moral beliefs we hold like that, so it's just so weird that people are surprised when you say, either I'm vegan or I'm anti-natalist or whatever, and then they're surprised that you think that like other people should be doing that as well.
And you shouldn't either. Like, try going and telling people that. Like, they're not going to like it. You can only talk about it in philosophy at the moment.
Yeah. To be honest with you, Alex,
they don't mind.
you're speaking to my private thoughts here, because I realize internally, to be consistent, I would have to spread the gospel of anti-natalism, right? Like I totally get that, and it's just, and you're exactly right. The reason why we don't, because it doesn't come up in polite conversation too much. Yeah. Obviously I'm here too, so I get to enjoy the benefits of being alive and stuff. And it's interesting though, because I've had conversations with people who will say, "Oh, the fact that you don't want kids is selfish because you're not giving back to the world, and you're just
the exact opposite."
That is the.
That's so crazy. That's so crazy as well. It's like, well, there's two things there. It's selfish. I mean, we don't need to go over those. Everyone knows why it isn't. But the fact that like you're not giving back to the world. So like the only way that you can give back to the world is by creating someone else. Really? Like, look around you, survey the human population. Are you going to say that all of those people that have been created, they are giving back? Right? Like, so many of them just work like bullshit jobs, like meaning. Do you get what I mean? Like,
Exact opposite of what I'm thinking, man. Like I'm thinking about the world. Like and this is my contribution to not having kids, because I'm able to contribute to society as a whole more grandly than I would with a couple of different offsprings. But anyway, this was a great discussion, Kapia. Thank you for calling in. And I know you're probably coming from Cosmic Skeptics podcast, but I hope you stick around for Truth Wanted.
No, it was great. I honestly like listening to all the stories from different people, and it's very touching sometimes, and it's a great show. So. Congratulations, and it was really nice talking to both of you today.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to me too.
Of course, and thank you for calling all the way from Bolivia. That is awesome. I hope I get more.
Cool. Okay, cool. What is the next one? So this next one is a bit of a shorter one. I'm not sure we're actually going to get through all of them, to be honest. So I might do this one because it's 13 minutes and this one because it's 12. I'm not sure we're going to get to this 20-minute one. Or 17 minutes. But we'll see how it goes.
Dylan here in Albuquerque. Dylan, you're live here on Truth
Is that the same Dylan?
Wanted. Hope you're ready. What is up?
Hi, Dylan. Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
This guy's like the happiest co-host ever.
How's it going, bud?
Yeah, I think I'm ready. Although I misplaced the notes I had written, so I kind of had to rewrite it real quick while I've been on hold.
Don't feel bad. I do that all the time.
Listen, that's more note taking than 99% of the people who call into this show. So you should feel good about that.
There you go.
Well, thank you. So I guess I wanted to continue the conversation we were having before, and I guess the best thing to do would be to kind of restate quickly what I had said before.
Yes.
Because obviously the Lavender Lady wasn't on, and you probably have some new listeners or whatever.
Absolutely. Context is always welcome on this show, please.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, so I'll start off with the same two questions I asked last time. And I already have your answers, Dan, so this can be more specifically towards the Lavender Lady.
Yes, sir.
And these are not trick questions. Hopefully Dan will vouch for me on that. So the first would be, do you believe there are too many people on Earth? Human
Yes.
beings. Are there
Oh, is it going to go down the overpopulation? I think it's going to go down overpopulation. It's not going to be actual antinatalism.
too many
Yes,
human beings? Yes. Okay.
Absolutely, I do.
And do you also believe that all babies deserve love?
Robert Watkins is in the chat as well. Welcome to the chat.
Yeah, let's give them let's give them the benefit of the doubt before they prove themselves to be arseholes. Let's give them the love.
Yeah,
because
that's,
I'll go for that.
Until you prove that you're an asshole, while you're a baby, you totally still deserve it. Or even a child, I would say,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like all babies and kids are innocent, right? Like they may grow up to be assholes, but like that is also like dependent on how you treat them as a kid. So, like you can also sway how likely they are to be one.
Children, if you're still school age, not yet a teenager or whatever. I don't know where exactly the cutoff would be, but yeah, I think generally young people, in my opinion, all are equally deserving of love and comfort, luxuries. I don't think there's any child that doesn't deserve to have a nice life.
I wish more did. I really do, and I wish more kids had a good life.
Me too. I think, and that's kind of what me and Dan were talking about, and kind of the crux of this whole discussion.
Okay, let's hear it.
This was the idea is that maybe as a society, here in America in particular, is my view, we should discuss adoption before biological births.
Okay.
I'm not saying that everyone has to do that. I just think it should at least be a discussion. I think adoption should be normalized and a lot more common.
Well, being an adopted child myself, I'm with you. Adoption really should occupy a preeminent place in people's minds, because if you're not adopting, if you're having the biological kid every time you want a kid, you're doing two things. First thing you're doing is another mouth to feed. And the second thing you're doing is another lonely kid who would really like a family out there and who's not getting one because he, she, whatever is not being adopted. Yeah, I think I'm following you, and I think I'm pretty much agreeing with you so far.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like this was maybe the right time to call. I was worried.
Yay! I like it.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the position of anti-natalism? Is that something you've been acquainted with? Or are you familiar with?
Is that something that goes along with the voluntary human extinction thing?
Oh, they've heard about Vehement.
Yes, it does.
Okay, I am familiar then, if that's where we're going. Yeah. Because I do know of the voluntary human extinction project, where it's basically, okay, let's just quit having kids, and eventually the human race will die out, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I kind of agree with that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't have as many objections to that as some people would, I'm sure. But yeah, if you look up
Nice glasses in the chat. Welcome.
Anti-natalism online, most of the sources will just describe if you're an anti-natalist, you are a baby hater and you hate human beings and you don't think everyone's
absolutely
just
not.
garbage and you should
Yeah.
Right.
No, I don't see you
This show seems like the most anti-natalist friendly show ever.
hating babies if you're an anti-natalist. No. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking there's that possibility that you actually love the babies that are not being brought into the world to suffer. That might be one way to look at it.
So there is that idea as well. That is how the anti-natalists themselves, some people would defend their position. But so here's what
Well, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the discussions they've had haven't actually been explicitly sort of philosophical anti-natalism, but these people do seem to be relatively open.
The common definition of anti-natalism is it's a philosophical position that assigns a negative value to birth. And I think that is a perfect analogy for what the ACA has been doing with the common definition of atheist. The common definition of atheist is just a person who lacks belief in or a person who disbelieves or lacks belief in the existence of God or gods.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know that argument so well. Yes, I know David Silverman versus Steve McRae. I can tell you about both sides of that.
For sure.
So it's kind of my goal here, and I mentioned this the last time we talked, Dan, that I think anti-natalism is in due of a facelift. It's time to redefine the word. It's time to take it back and make it a positive social movement.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The way I would define anti-natalism, or my neo-anti-natalism, maybe, I don't know how people are going to take, trying to define something that already has a definition, whatever. But I think
one thing I would say is that it's not just as simple as saying we need to reclaim it as something positive. Like, you actually, and I'm not saying this person isn't, I'm just making a general point, like, you actually need to put in the effort yourself. So, like, all of the online space, well, not all of them, but many of the online spaces that people will first come into contact with just have such trash on them, and like not well thought through things, loads, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, it's fine to, post memes and talk shit and stuff like that, but it's just like, it's probably better to do it in small private groups, like group chats and stuff with trusted people. Form chats and small groups with people and share stuff there if you want to share that sort of stuff. And everyone does, I do at points. And I try to do that in sort of private places where it doesn't mean that the sort of like the public facing side of the community is going to get like that smear of shit on it. So yeah, I also want it to get a more positive view from the outside, but that takes work, like it takes the whole community changing. Well, not the whole community, because some people do have a healthy way of engaging with the community, but many parts of the community presenting themselves in a more positive or thought through way. And yeah, I don't know. So I agree with him. I just think, it's not a simple task.
The way I view it is it's my position is that I would assign a negative value to population growth, or even at this point, a population plateau, because we have too many people on the planet.
I'm with you. I am definitely with you.
So I think and this is kind of my goal, is to normalize adoption and to normalize this idea that having babies is not, the ultimate human purpose or whatever. If you want to raise children, that's still a very noble thing, but I would make the argument that it's even more noble to adopt than to have a biological child.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And as Jen with one N mentioned, it's a lot more difficult to qualify to adopt a child than it is to simply pop one out. Now, I'm not going to say that what you go through to qualify to adopt a child is fail-safe. I'm not going to say that it's infallible. In my case, in the case of my sister, we didn't have such a great childhood. That's a story for another book. But okay, that's one case where it failed. But still, the system as a whole is a lot better than simply pop one out and then mistreat that one.
Yeah, that's something we talked about last time too with Dylan. Was like, well, yeah, like and we're definitely not even saying like every single person should be able to adopt. I've certainly met some kids who's from families that it's like, I wish they didn't adopt that kid. I think that they, weren't the best influences as parents for people. And that's certainly something to consider too. But I think, we're probably on the same page here when we agree that adoption is seen, at least in this country, as kind of just a secondary option. It's not really people's first go-to. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's treated as a kind of backup plan. Like, oh, if it turns out that we're infertile, then we'll just go the adoption route. And that's not something that, of course, everybody wants to change the world. Like, everybody wants to give society new norms. And I would love to give society this norm of, hey, not only is adoption something that you should consider first, but we should consider it something that is noble and something that is good and something that we could positively portray. And not to say that adoption has, it's gotten mixed, looks over the years, I suppose. But like, I'd say we're at a point now where it's like, we talk about like veganism, for example. There's so much like disparaging remarks made about vegans and stuff in media because of how much they talk about veganism, this, and that. And like the anti-natalist, I feel like is kind of in a similar boat. It's like whenever it's depicted in popular light, as you said, it's the same kind of problem where it's like if you actually talk to most vegans or if you actually talk to most anti-natalists, they're pretty chill about it. And vegans are doing what they do for the most part for ethical reasons, and we're doing what we do for ethical reasons as well. We have philosophical ideals as to why we want what we want, and that's not often, given the light of day that it certainly deserves. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where having more one-on-one conversations about this kind of stuff, especially with folks who are looking into starting families of their own, it always has to start with grassroots movements with these kinds of things. Of course, we got the internet where we can spread our messages as far and as wide as long as there's a computer out there. But yeah, for sure.
And if you have the viewers.
Yeah, for sure. Like obviously we're going to be talking to people, at least people who watch this show and people who call in. Probably most of them are going to agree with our views, but we definitely want to think of ideas of how we can change people's minds otherwise, as far as what we think is a good idea for people. So.
Yeah, totally. And wow, it's just, I'm stunned. So I can skip some more of these little side notes. Well, really, the next big point.
Oh, I think this guy thought he was going to get more pushback, but doesn't realize that this is a pretty welcoming show to this idea.
That maybe that's for another time. I think we could go into that idea of should people adopt? What does it take to be a good parent? How do you judge these things? I had a couple of things written down, but my fiance wants to eat dinner. I'm getting hungry too.
Okay.
And,
here's what we should do next time, Dylan. I don't know what the criteria is, at least in the United States, and I guess there's state laws that apply to this stuff too, about what qualifications go into adopting folks, and like what are the exact processes, and that'd be an interesting conversation to have to see.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, how great those are. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on that, but maybe that's something I need to look into for sure.
And Dylan, I want to thank you for this.
Cool. I think they're just going to be talking about sort of like adoption generally now. So let's have a look at this final one.
This is Mikey calling in from Finland. We're going.
Oh, Finland. Oh, it's very nearly Matty. So this one is thoughts on anti-natalism. Boom, boom, boom. And then we've got Dan again. And this new person, Erin.
All around the world today. Germany, Australia. Now we're at Finland. What's going on, Mikey?
Yeah, what's up? Hello, Erin and
Hi.
Dan.
Yeah, what's going on today?
About the last call. Never mind. I think you want to get on with the show. So,
sure.
I just wanted to ask, Dan, you have been talking about anti-natalism. So,
yes.
Can you please define the term and then what's your thoughts on it? And Erin, if you can continue on from that.
Yeah. Well, so it's something I guess I'm the only ACA host that talks about anti-natalism. So I get all the anti-natalism questions. In fact, I'd say as far as the emails I get just as much emails about anti-natalism, probably more so than any other topic almost. I mean, like I get a lot of emails about people trying to talk about beliefs and stuff like that, but specific subjects like anti-natalism seems to come up. I guess, like I said, I'm one of the only guys talking about it. But, I define it as it's a rejectionist philosophy. Okay. And it's this idea that when you are the choice to give birth is an ethical one, ultimately, at the end of the day. Like, hey, we've been talking about veganism a little bit, right? Eating animal products is an ethical choice that you could make.
I wonder if he's vegan, because he has brought it up quite a few times as an example.
Whether you decide to do that. Same thing with birth, right? Birth is an ethical choice. So whether or not you choose to make that decision, for me, I consider it an unethical choice. Okay, for me to give life, and that seems kind of radical, but I have a couple different arguments as to why. One is, ultimately it comes down to I want to bring the least amount of suffering I can into the world. I want to lessen the amount of suffering. And if I'm bringing a new life into the world, and there's a potential. Not only is there a potential for suffering there, but I have to distribute my resources to that person, or somebody has to distribute.
Right. Okay. So that it is actually sort of philanthropically, ethically. Sort of founded his anti-natalism.
Resources to that person in order for them to have the best life that they can. And so if I'm giving birth to that, again, potential for suffering, if something catastrophic goes wrong, if I die or something, or my presumably partner in that situation dies, I don't know if it's a partner, maybe I'm in a poly family or something, I don't know, whatever. Things can go wrong that are out of my control.
But also, like, if it's not going to be me giving my time, it's going to be somebody else. And so that's resources, that's food, that's time, that's energy that gets put into this, that could be used for other things. Now, I can't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but in the United States, we have lots and lots of kids in the foster care system. So many kids that could have all be solved tomorrow for anybody that wanted to adopt kids, and wanted to, or wanted to have kids, chose to adopt instead of having kids on their own. And so it's my belief that it's more ethical to adopt if you really want to have kids than to have kids of your own, because again, like, you're taking somebody out of that system. It's a better distribution of the resources that we have, and you're making what I would consider the ethical choice in that scenario. This is just my thoughts off the cuff, of course. I thought about writing more cohesive stuff about it, but there's a great book by Ken Coates that talks about it.
Oh, so he has actually read anti-natalist literature as well. That's cool. I actually have. Oh, it's literally here. I literally have Ken Coates' book here. I don't know. Oh, wait, hang on. Ken Coates' book here. I've been well, I should be reading more recently, but like, my book that I'm reading at the moment is this one. And then next I'm gonna get on to Corinne McKermer's Anti-natalist handbook. Oh, fuck. Yeah, that's interesting. He's read Ken Coates's book, so he's actually like kind of into this subject. Maybe he just kind of plays it a bit milder and like talks more about the adoption argument because he doesn't want to be too spicy, because he is on like an atheist platform rather than an anti-natalist one. And Manic Alien says, by the way, hi Anton. Hello, thank you, welcome for being, well, what even was that? Was that even English? Basically, thanks for watching, and hello as well. Cool, let's keep going.
You can find on Amazon about kind of the history of anti-natalism. Kind of really goes back to Buddhist philosophy even, and goes from there. But yeah, I guess that's my take in summation, my sloppy take on anti-natalism. So there you go.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. And I think I lost half of it because I think my connection is a bit wonky. But so does your take on anti-natalism include only yourself or also other people?
Yeah. So great question. Like, I mean, ethics ultimately involves other people, right? And so it would be unwise of me to say that we should enforce some sort of state policy that says everybody can't have children anymore. One, I don't think that's practical, because people have children sometimes when they don't even mean to, but also that it's not popular. It's way not popular. So many people want kids, and it's not only is it ingrained culturally and encouraged culturally for us to have kids, but there is kind of an instinct in us a little bit too to have kids. That's why we're here. And so, yeah, like, it's not that I don't think that having kids is a nice thought, in the sense that, yeah, I wouldn't mind having a son or a daughter and have somebody to raise, but there are other ways to kind of do that without giving new life. That's why I'm a big advocate for adoption, although the process is lengthy. And again, not every family that adopts, that kid's necessarily going to go to a great home either. But, we have those kids out there, and there is kind of this problem. And I think the solution to that is more people adopting. And I wish people considered adoption as their first choice rather than being the thing that you do when you can't have kids or something. But yeah, it's
be interested to hear Erin's take, because I would assume she's not an anti-natalist just because most people aren't.
It's out there. It's a take that's out there. I don't know if it's growing or if it stayed the same. I don't know. As secular nations, we tend to have a declining rate of birth compared to developing nations, and even Japan at some points in recent history has had a negative decline in birth because of our lifestyle and our freedom of choice, and realizing that, hey, we can have careers and not have kids and just live our lives just fine. So maybe we'll see more of it in the future. I don't know. But if you're having trouble listening to this now, Mikey, you can always watch the video recording and hear what I have to say about it. So is that?
It just switched on to the other screen, so you got a sneak peek of what I was listening to earlier. Sam Harris's latest episode with Peter Singer. Cool.
satisfy your question?
Well, yeah, no. Well, kind of, yeah.
Okay.
If you don't mind me taking over your show, what does Jeff think?
Right, of course. Yeah, what time is it? Like 4 o'clock in the morning in Finland right now? Like I can't even imagine what hour you're calling me from.
Something like that. Something like that. Yeah.
Can I make a couple comments on that?
Make some comments. Make some comments, Aaron.
This is one topic that I wasn't even aware of. Like I do have kids.
Mhm.
I have 2 kids. But since hearing a lot of
welcome to the chat, Moonshine.
the arguments that are made for it, I think that it's a controversial topic that needs to be at least put out there so people can make informed decisions. Because I think I would have no way to prove this, but I feel like most people who have kids haven't heard the arguments. They're not making the decisions thinking that they're making an ethical decision. They're just going, like what you said, Dan, just kind of going through that, the life phases. Or you do this, and then the next you do this, So
Right.
I have to say, like, if I had heard that argument before, or maybe I wouldn't have, because I was still, a pretty strong believer at that time. Maybe that would have gone against something in me there. But even that, I feel like that's like they could be easily what do you call it, harmonized. But since I don't plan on having any more kids, and I think a part of that is because now
Welcome to the chat, Sentient Soy Boy, as well.
aware of this argument, and so there is definitely a need for the conversation to happen and for people to at least hear the arguments before they make the decision.
Yeah, I feel like I can't justify the action of having kids without having a reason that's selfish in one way or another. Like, oh, I want something that looks like me, or I want to have that experience.
Yeah, and honestly, when I think about having my kids, I'm like, oh, like when I had my kids, like they were all reasons that had nothing to do with ethics.
Yeah.
So it's like, of course, I have to disclosure. I love them, and I would do anything for them. I'm so glad I have them, but I had never even considered it before.
Yeah, I talked about this with Shannon Q one time. This wasn't on the show. This was off the air, and she was really grilling me. She was trying to say like, "Oh, so do you think it was bad for me to have kids?" And it was just like, "No, because I don't think that you understood things in the same way that I'm explaining to you now." Like,
welcome the man to the chat as well. So Nadia has sent in $10 US. Thank you so much, Nadia. All of this support like really helps cover all the costs, so thank you so much. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the fruits of your support, all the content and stuff. So Nadia says, as great as adoption is in concept, the adoption system at present as presently constituted is deeply problematic. Fixing up its problems alongside promoting adoption would be a good idea. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much, Nadia. And yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about the US adoption system. I actually don't even know what the UK adoption system is like. And I don't know the specific like issues that you see in the US adoption system. But, like any system made by humans is going to have flaws, so I'm just not surprised that the adoption system has flaws, especially systems that involve like safeguarding. They're always going to have some flaws. So I'm really not surprised that the adoption system has flaws. So I agree with you. I think like adoption should be promoted as a good, but like we can also make it even better, if you get what I mean. Like in principle, we can make the argument that it's good, but also work on the practical side of things, there's a few things like, one, you need to be able to identify and find the children that need to be in the system, accurately, because there might be kids that just don't get picked up by the system. You need to then be able to responsibly look after the kids whilst they're in the system. You need to have an adequate screening process for the potential adoptive parents. You need to have support for the adoptive parents. You need to have resources in place and frameworks in place to make the transition of them adopting a kid, from going from them not having a kid or not having adopted that kid to being in the care of that kid, being responsible for the care of that kid. Like that needs to be, eased, that transition period, all this sort of stuff. So yeah, there's so many parts to it. So I've honestly no doubt that, there are big flaws in many systems around the world.
My purpose in this explanation is not to play the blame game with people, because humans have been doing this for as long as we've existed. It's understandable why people have kids, but understanding the philosophy that I have now and just the reasoning abilities that I have, I cannot compel myself to have kids. and feel okay with that. And I think that there's other people, like you said, Aaron, if that knew kind of some of these points, they'd probably agree. Right.
Well, even the people that I've met, like in my circle, so like I used to go to like the women's Bible studies and stuff, and like there's a lot of conversation around kids and people planning on having children, and I can tell you that I don't think it was ever brought up once, and that's a huge group of women who are sitting there conversing with each other. And does it ever come up whether it's ethical to go ahead and go through a pregnancy and have your own kids? It's not even on the agenda. So I think it's interesting to.
Hey, Charlatan, welcome to the chat. And actually, we'll be having a chat soon.
I wonder how many people are compelled by these arguments. I'm not sure. I kind of feel like I don't have much more say in it because I've done what I've done, and I don't plan on having any more. And I'm not sure if that was before. Actually, I'm pretty sure I had to just I was too and done before I heard the arguments. But I think that if I could go back 10 years, I'm like, I wonder what would have happened for me if I would have heard those arguments, because I do find a lot of them compelling.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like at least be aware, at least know that this is a thing, and don't please, by all means, if your kids say, I'm speaking to parents out there, if your kids say they don't want to have kids, please don't pressure them into making a decision that they don't want to make. Yeah.
That's exactly it too. I have 2 kids. I have a daughter, and I just raising her with the awareness that she doesn't have to actually get married, have kids, and do the whole thing. That's just realizing that there is the option to not do that is something that I didn't realize. So I think it's an amazing kind of conversation to bring up. Like, do you have to get married? Do you have to have?
We
kids?
shame people. We shame people for not having kids. Yeah, absolutely. Try being a young Christian woman. Yeah, be a young Christian woman in this country and tell your congregation, I don't plan on having kids, and see what their response is. There's going to be at least one person that says it's your godly duty to have kids.
I cannot tell you how many times I was pressured to have more kids, and so for me, I have other reasons why I don't have a whole bunch of kids. I have my own chronic health issues. So for me, the decision to have one was, a lot. The decision to have 2 was even harder. And you go to church and you go to different women's, and they tell you, there's a lot of this idea that like if you're closing yourself off to having all of the children that God wants you to have,
you're doing something wrong.
You're doing something wrong. And so like that is on the opposite end of the antinatalism conversation. Like they actually think that you're doing something morally good by having as many children as you can, because that it's actually in the Bible to go forward and multiply. So it's a really important conversation, even if you're not going at it from like an atheistic or anything kind of standpoint. Just bringing up the conversation, like, do you think it's maybe you should adopt or think about adopting first, or like just is there any like kind of low key ways we can have these conversations be brought up in those ultra conservative environments even?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to see. I've never brought it amongst the conservative audience before. I'd have to see what they say. But we have some other calls. I want to get to 2 more before we get to the end here. Mike.
Cool. So that is the end of that one, and we're not going to be able to get to that last one because I need to have some dinner, and then I've got things to do. But that was actually interesting, to be honest, even though I was a bit disappointed that like most of the conversations that were being had weren't actually really about philanthropic antinatalism. You had environmentalism, and we had overpopulation and adoption, and those are all interesting discussions, but it's like they're not directly antinatalism. Hey, CDA activism, just joined the chat. And yeah, so that was it. But it was also cool to hear about Objectively Dan. He did get into it a bit, and it was cool to see that actually he does seem like a philanthropic antinatalist. Like, it doesn't seem like he's done the most... It doesn't seem like he's the most familiar with all the arguments out of anyone that I've heard speak, but he may just be holding it back because of the environment he's in. Maybe he doesn't want to go full balls deep. Do you get what I mean? So yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to him more. I mean, to be honest, I've been meaning for like a few months to reach out to him, but I've just been, busy with the conference and stuff like that. But yeah, that's it. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed watching all those clips. The chat has been super active, which is really nice to see. Alan is in there right at the last minute. And yeah, just thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for the support from Nadia and Basil as well. It really helps. And thanks everyone for watching. I will see you on the weekend for the conference. Make sure you're there, because it is going to be great. And I will see you all in the next one, and I will see you all at the conference.